invited to this important place, an Academy of Science and Arts. They tell me this is where the great minds meet, so therefore I can only be here for 1 hour, but I'm honored to be with you. In discussing the threats to democracy, of course, in discussing anything, it's important that you define your terms. And so let's define freedom. I define freedom as a three-legged stool. It is economic, political, and spiritual. And in a three-legged stool, if you take one of the legs away, it doesn't work. And so poor Gorbachev, he wanted to have more economic freedom because after all these years, communism only had, the Soviet Union only had what it's stolen from the West and tried to reproduce. And he felt that they could do better. And so he wanted to have a glasnost, an opening where they could have more freedom. And he went over and he opened up the window economically. And the people began to perk up and breathe the fresh air. And they said, oh, there's the problem, the window. And so they went over and broke open the window politically. Because in order to be free, you have to have economic freedom. You have to have political liberty. But then there has to be a value system as to what is right and wrong. And there's only two options. One is what I say is right. One is what you say is right. And the other is what God says is right. There has to be a spiritual component. And without a spiritual component, democracy can be very dangerous. Because democracy says that rights come from the majority. In America, they were very cautious about that because there was a revolution going on in France at the same time that America was being founded in its constitutional convention. And in France, they wanted to get rid of the aristocracy, and they wanted to have rights come from the majority. And when rights come from the majority, that means that what the majority says is right, and there's no protection for the minority, which means they can even take their lives. So the symbol of the French Revolution was the guillotine. And the American founders said, that is exactly what we don't want. Therefore, the word, and this might come as a little bit of a surprise, and I'll need to clean it up a bit. The word democracy does not appear in any of America's founding documents. It does not appear in any of the constitutions of the 50 states because our rights do not come from the majority. They come from God. And God, who gave us life. And see, the French did away with God. They started, so in America, it was life, liberty, and the pursuit of virtue or happiness. Notice the sequence. See, liberty is of precious little value if you're dead. You have to have life first, then liberty. And in the French Revolution, you started with liberty, equality. What happens when you try to have equality? People object. Why do you object? You have to kill them. So it's liberty, equality, and where do rights come from? The group, fraternity. So it's liberty, equality, and there's no protection for life. In America, we said we want protection for life, and where does life come from? Not from the people, it comes from God. The God who gave us life, gave us liberty at the same time. And that fight goes on continually. Our daughter spent a year in Rwanda trying to put that country together because under a democracy, 80% of the people in Rwanda are Hutu and 20% are Tutsi. And under a democracy, 80% can vote to kill the 20%. And they did. Over a course of 90 days with machetes, they chopped 1 million people to pieces. Well, therefore, there has to be a higher standard. For freedom, there has to be economic freedom, political freedom, and spiritual liberty of a godly standard. And that then gives us the opportunity to compete. economically to compete to prove that our ideas are better, politically that our ideas are better. But man's nature, and man's nature doesn't change. That's why we have to keep God in the mix. Man's nature is he doesn't want to compete. He wants to use the power of government that only his company can succeed, as Obrad was referring to. So there's a constant battle to get government to protect their company, or to get government to protect their political idea, or to get government to eliminate other people's spiritual questions. That leads to death. That leads to poverty. So therefore, in this constant competition, it's important that we would have the discussion that we have here today. Let me conclude by saying this. If you were to ask me what is the most important thing I've ever learned in my entire life, it would be this: that everything in life is either physical or spiritual. And wisdom is the capacity to know which is which. We know that a glass is physical. Some people think love is physical. Love is not. Love is spiritual. Some people think peace is physical. If they just send enough diplomats to Israel on the border and discuss with the Palestinians enough tanks and water rights, and physically, peace is not physical, peace is spiritual. And wisdom is the capacity to know where to spend our focus on what is physical and spiritual. Final point is this: what is the definition of truth? I can say that this room is 10 meters wide. You can say it's 9 meters wide. You can say it's 6 meters wide. And you can say it's 5 meters wide. And we can write white papers on it, and we can have conferences, and we can have international discussions, and everything's fine until someone comes and measures it. And that measurement is truth. Everything else is just opinion. But the significance of truth, it reveals error. Therefore, error hates truth. So someone comes in and they measure it, and it's 6.5 meters. And I said it was 10, and you said it was 9, and you said it was 8. Everybody in the room knows that what I said was wrong. Therefore, we all hate truth. So we want to prevent the presentation of truth. We want to go on YouTube and shut down communications and talk. We want to deny people the right to speak, because truth will overcome error, and freedom requires the expression of truth. And that is the constant battle for every generation. So don't be frightened. Your parents went through it, your grandparents went through it, and your grandchildren will go through it. And we must decide that we want to be on the side of freedom, which is economic freedom. We can compete. Political liberty, I have to stand out there and have a superior idea or I don't get elected. And I have the right to say that what I say is not right. God is the standard. Thank you.